When black soldiers demonstrated their techniques to Japanese POW women, the room fell silent. Not from shock or fear, but from the power of a simple melody that crossed enemy lines. A war-weary black soldier, far from his Georgia home, finds himself guarding Japanese women prisoners on a forgotten Pacific island. During a raging typhoon, as walls crumble and fear fills the air, he reaches for the only piece he knows, his father's old harmonica. The notes rise above the howling storm, and then something extraordinary happens. One of the Japanese women begins to sing along. Same tune, different words. Two enemies sharing one song. Military commanders call it inappropriate fraternization. The newspapers hint at scandal. But beneath the accusations lies a story of unexpected grace, a harmony found amidst the discord of war. As a quilt takes shape, stitched with hope in two languages, so does something deeper between people who should be enemies. What happens when music speaks what words cannot? When hearts recognize each other across battle lines? And in a world still bleeding from war's wounds, can a simple tune heal what bullets have broken? Early dawn painted the sky a watery gray as the small U.S. transport ship pushed through thick fog. Private Elijah Brooks stood at attention on deck, salt spray misting his dark face. The war's been over for nearly a year, but here he was, still in uniform, still far from his Georgia home. "Land ho!" called the lookout. Through the lifting fog, Elijah spotted it. Tinian, Post 47. A forgotten dot on the vast Pacific Ocean. Below deck, 8 Japanese women sat in silence. Prisoners of war, the last batch waiting for processing before being sent home. Elijah had been told little about them, only that they needed guarding. He and the other men of the 93rd Infantry, the all-Negro unit folks back home called the Buffalo Soldiers, had drawn this duty while white units handled more important tasks. "Brooks, get down there and make sure they ain't causing trouble," barked Sergeant Mills. "Yes, sir," Elijah answered, ducking through the narrow doorway to the hold. The smell hit him first, seawater mixed with sweat and fear. The women sat hunched on wooden benches, swaying with the ship's motion. 7 pairs of eyes looked away as he entered, but one woman, bent double, didn't look up at all. "She's been sick since we left Okinawa," another woman whispered in broken English. Sergeant Mills had said to let them be, but Elijah couldn't ignore suffering. He knelt beside the seasick woman, offering his canteen. "Water," he said gently. "Drink." The woman lifted her head slightly. Her face was pale, her hair falling in a black curtain around hollow cheeks. Around her neck hung a small silver crucifix that caught Elijah by surprise. "Christian?" he asked, pointing. The woman nodded weakly, took a small sip, then whispered something in Japanese. An older woman translated. "She says thank you." "What's her name?" Elijah asked. "Aiko," came the reply. "I am Reiko. That is Hana, Yumi, Fumiko, Sachiko, Emi, and Mei." Elijah nodded at each woman. "I'm Private Brooks, Elijah Brooks." The ship lurched suddenly. Aiko groaned, and Elijah steadied her with a strong hand. "It'll pass soon," he said. "Land's in sight." From above came the sound of boots on metal. "Brooks, front and center." Elijah stood. "Coming, Sergeant." He climbed back to the deck, where Sergeant Mills waited with narrowed eyes. "Getting friendly with the enemy, Private?" "No, sir. Just checking on the prisoners." "Well, they're not our problem much longer. Captain Madsen will take charge once we dock." "Form the men into ranks." "Yes, sir." As Elijah called the other soldiers to attention, the ship's engines slowed. The vessel glided toward a small wooden dock, where a handful of soldiers waited. The island smelled of rust, salt, and unfamiliar peace. The gangplank lowered with a clank. Sergeant Mills barked orders, and the women were herded up from below. Aiko stumbled, still weak from seasickness. Without thinking, Elijah reached out to steady her. Their eyes met for just a moment, brown to brown, before she looked down and shuffled forward with the others into the gray island morning. The barracks sat at the edge of the camp, a long, low building of bamboo and tin that rattled when the wind blew. A fence of wire surrounded it, separating the women from the rest of the post. "You men will rotate night duty," Captain Madsen told Elijah's squad. The captain was tall and thin, with skin burned red by the island sun. He looked at the black soldiers with barely hidden dislike. "Keep your distance. They're still Japs, even if they're women." Elijah and his squad took the first watch. From his post outside the barracks, he could hear the women's soft voices through the thin walls. "I was a nurse," one was saying in hesitant English. "Hana," Elijah remembered. "In Tokyo Hospital." "I played shamisen, like your guitar," said another voice. Aiko's. She sounded stronger now. "My sons died at Iwo Jima," said a harder voice. Reiko, the oldest woman. "I have nothing to return to." Corporal Lewis sidled up beside Elijah. "Lady POWs." He chuckled. "Never thought I'd see the day." "They're just women far from home," Elijah said quietly. "Like us, you mean? Far from home." Lewis grinned. "Difference is, we won the war. Don't reckon winning feels much different from losing when you're stuck on an island at the end of the world, comma." Lewis shrugged and moved on. Elijah remained at his post as darkness fell. A cool breeze swept in from the ocean, carrying the promise of rain. Through a narrow slit in the barracks wall, he glimpsed movement. Aiko sat near the window, her face tilted toward the evening breeze. Her lips moved, and a soft hum drifted out, a melody that tugged at Elijah's memory. Something like a hymn, but with different words. The rain started, gentle at first, then harder. Elijah pulled his cap lower and listened to the music that wove between the raindrops. Morning in the mess tent brought the smell of powdered eggs and stale coffee. Elijah sat apart from the others, reading a letter that had arrived on yesterday's supply boat. "Dear brother, the farm is holding on, but barely. The drought has dried the creek to nothing but stones and dust. Mama asks about you every day. 'Is my boy coming home soon?' she says. I tell her yes, though I don't know if it's true. The church ladies made a quilt for Reverend Hall's new baby. I helped with the stitching and thought of how you used to tease me about my crooked seams. I miss those days, Elijah. I miss you. Come home when you can. Your sister." Ruth. Elijah folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Georgia seemed as distant as the moon. "Attention!" The mess tent fell silent as Captain Madsen entered. "I've been informed that some of you have been conversational with the female prisoners. This stops now." His cold eyes swept across the black soldiers. "They may look harmless, but they're still the enemy. Any man caught getting friendly will answer to me. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir," came the dutiful chorus. After breakfast, Elijah's squad was assigned to repair a storage shed. The work kept his hands busy, but his mind wandered. Madsen's warning bothered him. The captain treated the 93rd differently than the white units, looking for any excuse to find fault. In the women's barracks, Aiko had discovered a stub of pencil and was writing in a small book she kept hidden in her sleeve. Her English was limited, but she recorded her thoughts as best she could. "The colored soldier who looked away instead of staring brought water when I was sick. His eyes were kind. He is the first American to see me as human since the surrender." She hid the book away as Reiko approached. "You should not trust any of them," the older woman warned in Japanese. "Black or white, they are all conquerors." "We must trust someone," Aiko replied softly, "or we will never find our way home." That evening, before roll call, Elijah reached into his footlocker and pulled out a small harmonica. The tarnished metal felt cool against his palm. His father had given it to him before he shipped out, saying, "Music makes friends where words fail." He slipped it into his pocket and headed out into the gathering dusk. Clouds rolled in from the east, heavy and dark as smoke. Elijah stood on the beach, watching the horizon disappear behind a wall of gray. The air felt strange, too still, too heavy. The sound of hoofbeats made him turn. A messenger on horseback galloped toward the camp, stirring up dust from the dry trail. The post used horses for inland travel. Jeeps were reserved for officers. "Typhoon coming," the rider called as he pulled his mount to a stop. "Just got the wire from Guam." The camp sprang to life with activity. Men hammered boards over windows, secured loose equipment, filled sandbags. Captain Madsen assigned Elijah's squad to reinforce the main buildings. "What about the women's barracks?" Elijah asked. "That roof won't hold in a big blow." "They'll manage," Madsen said dismissively. "Sir, with respect, that building's not safe. The walls are half-rotted bamboo." "Are you questioning my orders, Private?" "No, sir. Just concerned for the prisoner's safety." "Your concern is noted," Madsen said coldly. "Now get back to work." The sky darkened further as afternoon faded to evening. Wind whistled through the camp, bending palm trees like blades of grass. The women were ordered to remain inside their barracks, despite the roof that already leaked from ordinary rain. Elijah finished securing the last of the supply tents, then glanced toward the women's quarters. Through the gathering gloom, he saw water dripping through the ceiling, forming puddles on the dirt floor. Thunder cracked overhead, making the earth tremble. Inside the barracks, one of the women screamed as a kerosene lantern crashed to the floor, glass shattering. A flicker of flame licked at the dry bamboo wall. "Fire!" Elijah shouted, racing toward the barracks. Corporal Lewis and Private Tiny Jefferson followed close behind. Rain pelted them, driven sideways by the howling wind. The camp siren wailed, barely audible above the storm. "The door's locked!" Lewis yelled, pulling at the barracks entrance. Elijah grabbed a rock and smashed the padlock. The door flew open, nearly ripped from its hinges by the wind. Inside, chaos reigned. Water poured through a growing hole in the roof. The women huddled in a corner, away from the fallen lantern. Flames climbed the wall, eating the dry bamboo. "Get 'em out!" Elijah ordered, grabbing a blanket to beat at the fire. Lewis and Jefferson herded the women toward the door. Hannah stumbled over a broken floorboard, crying out in pain. Blood welled from a gash in her arm where splintered wood had caught her. Elijah abandoned the fire, scooping Hannah up in his arms. "The whole place is coming down," he shouted. "We need to move now." Outside, the storm raged in full fury. Sheets of rain turned the ground to mud that sucked at their boots. With no time to reach the main buildings, Elijah led the group to the nearest shelter, the soldier's hut. They stumbled inside, soaked and gasping. The small building shook with each gust, but its tin roof held. "Tiny, get the medical kit," Elijah ordered, setting Hannah gently on a cot. He tore a strip from his own blanket and wrapped it around her bleeding arm. "It's not deep," he told her. "You'll be all right." The other women huddled together, dripping and frightened. Reiko stood apart, her face a mask of stoic endurance. Aiko helped Elijah tend to Hannah, holding the bandage in place while he tied it. "Thank you," she said, the English words carefully shaped. Outside, the typhoon unleashed its full power. Rain hammered the roof like bullets. Wind screamed around the corners of the hut. The single lantern flickered, casting giant shadows on the walls. "Gonna be a long night," Lewis said, nervously eyeing the ceiling. Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out his harmonica. Without speaking, he raised it to his lips and began to play softly, "Nearer, my God, to thee." The simple melody filled the hut, somehow rising above the storm's fury. The women grew still, listening. Even Reiko's hard face softened slightly. As Elijah played the chorus, he heard another sound joining his music, a humming voice. Aiko was singing along, in Japanese, but to the same tune. Their music twined together, one in harmony with the other. Lightning flashed, illuminating faces no longer divided by war. For that moment, they were just people sheltering together from the storm. Soldiers and prisoners, Americans and Japanese, Black and Asian, all fell silent in the presence of something greater than their differences. Dawn broke clear and fresh. The typhoon had passed, leaving behind a changed landscape. Palm trees lay uprooted, debris littered the beach, buildings stood damaged or destroyed. The camp's American flag hung limp and sodden from its bent pole. Elijah stepped outside, blinking in the bright sunlight. The women followed, surveying the destruction with wide eyes. "Your barracks is gone," he told them, pointing to where the building had stood. Only scattered bamboo and twisted tin remained. Captain Madsen appeared, riding in a jeep with Sergeant Mills. His face darkened when he saw the women outside the soldiers' hut. "Private Brooks," he shouted, "explain yourself." Elijah saluted. "Fire in the women's barracks during the storm, sir. We evacuated them here. Their quarters are destroyed." Madsen inspected the ruins with a scowl. "I'll have to request new housing arrangements from headquarters." He turned to Elijah, eyes cold. "Until then, they'll have to shelter in the storage shed. Get them there now. The shed's roof is half gone, sir." "Then fix it, Private. That's an order." After Madsen left, Elijah organized a work detail. To his surprise, the women joined in without being asked, gathering scattered materials and helping to clear debris. Iko worked alongside Elijah, handing him nails as he repaired the shed roof. Neither spoke much, but a sense of understanding passed between them. By midday, the camp was slowly returning to order. The women moved into the repaired shed, which Elijah had made as comfortable as possible with salvaged blankets and a fresh water barrel. Captain Madsen returned for inspection, eyeing the work with grudging approval. "Efficient, I'll give you that," he said, "but I don't like seeing prisoners working freely among my men." "They just wanted to help, sir," Elijah replied. "That's not their place. Keep them confined from now on." As sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, whispers spread among the white soldiers at the far end of the camp. "Heard the coloreds had those Jap women in their quarters all night," one said. "Bet they demonstrated their techniques," another laughed. "Room probably fell silent when they saw what they were packing." The crude jokes carried on the evening breeze to where Elijah stood guard. He felt shame twist into anger in his gut, but kept his face neutral. He had learned long ago that showing anger only made things worse. Instead, he watched as Iko stood in the doorway of the shed, her face turned toward the setting sun. She was humming again, that same hymn from the night before. The Japanese words were different, but the melody was a bridge between worlds. For a moment, Elijah forgot the whispers, the captain's distrust, the long road home to Georgia. He just listened, finding peace in the simple truth that music belongs to no nation, no race. It belongs only to the heart that embraces it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, in the aftermath of the storm, a fragile harmony had begun. The morning sun climbed high over Tinian, turning the puddles left by the typhoon into wisps of steam. Elijah rose early, the habit of army life too deep in his bones to sleep past dawn, even after a night of troubled dreams. He splashed cold water on his face and thought about home. The storm had churned up memories of Georgia thunderstorms that shook the farmhouse windows and sent his little sister scurrying to his bed for comfort. "Mail call," someone shouted outside, breaking his thoughts. Men rushed from barracks and tents, eager for news from home. Elijah hung back, watching the scramble. His sister Ruth wrote faithfully every week, but her letters often arrived in bunches, delayed by the long journey across ocean and land. The commotion at the edge of camp caught his attention. A military jeep bounced along the rough road, a cloud of dust billowing behind it. The driver, a young white soldier Elijah didn't recognize, hopped out with an official-looking envelope. "Captain Madsen," the courier called. "Urgent from headquarters." Soldiers paused in their mail-grabbing, curious. Captain Madsen emerged from his office, his face already set in its usual frown. Elijah returned to his morning duties, assigned to deliver water to the women's new quarters in the storage shed. As he approached with 2 heavy buckets, he heard Iko's voice through the open doorway. She was teaching the others a psalm, the same hymn from the night of the storm. Their voices, though quiet, carried a strength that made Elijah pause. "Private Brooks." Elijah turned to find Sergeant Mills striding toward him, face tight with anger. "Captain wants you, now," Yes, sir. Let me just deliver this water. Now means now, Private. Elijah set the buckets down and followed Mills to the command tent. Inside, Captain Madsen sat behind a field desk, the morning sun streaming through the canvas above him. He held a typewritten memo, his knuckles white against the paper. "Do you know what this is, Private?" Madsen asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, sir." "It's a communication from Pacific Command. A reporter from the Herald Tribune is being sent to investigate an incident of misconduct involving prisoners under our care." Madsen stood slowly. "Would you know anything about that, Brooks?" Elijah's stomach tightened. "No, sir. There's been no misconduct that I'm aware of." "Really? Because headquarters seems to think that my men, specifically the colored soldiers under my command, have been getting far too friendly with the Japanese women." "Sir, during the typhoon, we had to evacuate them from a burning building. We had no choice but to—" "I know about the storm," Madsen cut in. "What I want to know is why someone is spreading rumors about improper behavior." "I don't know, sir." Madsen circled the desk, coming to stand directly in front of Elijah. "You've been soft on those women from the start, Brooks. Your kind always is, too quick to forget they're the enemy." Elijah felt heat rising in his face, but kept his expression neutral. "My kind, sir? You know what I mean. You think because they smile at you, because they're not white, you have something in common. Well, let me tell you something. They'd have cut your throat 6 months ago if they had the chance." "They're prisoners of war, sir. The war is over." "The war is never over, Private." Madsen slapped the memo against Elijah's chest. "And thanks to your softness, we're about to have a newspaper sniffing around. If anything comes of this, I'll have you court-martialed faster than you can say discharge." "Yes, sir." Dismissed. Outside, Corporal Lewis and Private Jefferson waited, concern on their faces. "What happened?" Lewis asked as they walked back toward the barracks. "Reporters coming. Headquarters heard rumors about us and the women." Jefferson, nicknamed Tiny despite standing 6'4", spat in the dirt. "Those white boys at the radio tower. Bet they sent some tale back home about us." "Captain's looking for someone to blame," Lewis said. "And guess who's wearing the target?" "It don't matter," Elijah said quietly. "We did nothing wrong." But as the day wore on, a sense of unease spread through the camp. White soldiers eyed the black unit with suspicion. Orders came down restricting the 93rd to barracks, except for essential duties. That evening, as Elijah stood at the fence line during his guard shift, he noticed Aiko watching him from the shed doorway. Her eyes held a question he couldn't answer. Later, as darkness settled over the camp, he found a small folded paper tucked into a crack in the fence. Inside, in careful English letters, "Thank you for the song." Elijah slipped the note into his pocket, next to his sister's letter and his heart. The ferry from Guam arrived mid-morning 3 days later, bringing supplies, mail, and one passenger who stood out immediately. A woman in khaki trousers and a practical shirt, her brown hair cut short under a wide-brimmed hat. She carried a leather satchel and a camera case, walking with the confidence of someone used to making her own path. "That must be the reporter," Lewis whispered as they watched from their work detail. Captain Madsen greeted the woman at the dock, his stiff posture visible even from a distance. They spoke briefly before walking toward the command center, the woman gesturing as she talked, seemingly undeterred by Madsen's cold reception. "Clara Adams," Tiny said, "heard the mail clerk say her name. Wrote stories about the fighting on Okinawa. They say she don't scare easy." "She better not," Lewis replied, "coming to a place like this, asking questions Madsen don't want answered." Elijah said nothing, focusing on the supply crates they were supposed to be unloading. But he couldn't help watching the reporter disappear into the command tent. Inside, Clara Adams wasted no time getting to the point. "I'd like to speak with the Japanese women first, Captain," she said, pulling a notebook from her satchel. "Then with the soldiers who were present during the incident." "There was no incident, Miss Adams," Madsen replied coldly. "Just a typhoon that forced some hasty decisions." "Then you have nothing to worry about," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And it's Mrs. Adams, by the way. My husband was killed at Normandy." Matson's expression flickered. I'm sorry for your loss, as am I for yours. Now, about those interviews? An hour later, under Madson's watchful eye, Clara sat with the Japanese women in their makeshift quarters. A translator had been provided, a white lieutenant with just enough Japanese to get by. Ask them how they've been treated, Clara instructed. The lieutenant spoke haltingly. The women exchanged glances before Reiko, the eldest, answered. She says they have been treated correctly. The lieutenant translated awkwardly. Clara studied Reiko's face, noting the careful neutrality in her expression. She turned to Aiko, whose eyes held more emotion. And what about during the storm? I understand there was a fire. After translation, Aiko spoke softly, her hands moving as she described the flames, the rain, the rescue. The lieutenant stumbled over the words. She says the black soldiers saved them. One played music that made everyone peaceful. Clara wrote quickly in her notebook. Does she remember his name? Brooks, Aiko said directly in English, before the question could be translated. Private Brooks. Captain Madsen shifted uncomfortably. I think that's enough, Mrs. Adams. These women have chores to attend to. Just one more question, Clara insisted. She looked directly at Aiko. What was the music he played? The lieutenant translated. Nearer, my God, to thee, Aiko replied in careful English. In my language also. Clara nodded, making a final note before closing her notebook. Thank you, ladies. Later that afternoon, Clara observed from a distance as Elijah taught the women how to patch torn uniforms, a task assigned by Madsen as productive busy work for the prisoners. She watched his patient demonstrations, the respectful distance he maintained, the occasional shy smile that passed between him and Aiko when a stitch came out right. As the sun began to set, Clara wrote in her notebook, demonstration of grace, or something deeper. She underlined the word grace twice, then snapped her notebook shut and headed back to her temporary quarters to plan tomorrow's interviews. Early morning brought the sound of hammers echoing across the camp. Madsen had ordered construction of a proper prisoner's barracks, using the 93rd Infantry as labor. The work served two purposes. It kept the soldiers busy, and it kept them under observation. Today, we teach basic carpentry to the prisoners, Madsen announced at morning roll call. The women need to be kept occupied until their transfer paperwork comes through. Elijah and his squad were assigned to oversee the lessons, a thinly veiled attempt to keep everyone separated by busy work. They probably know more about building than we do, Lewis grumbled as they gathered tools. My daddy was a preacher, not a carpenter. Just follow my lead, Elijah said. My pa built every fence post and barn board on our place. I picked up a few things. The women emerged from their temporary quarters, blinking in the bright sunlight. They lined up obediently, waiting for instructions. Clara Adams stood nearby, notebook in hand, watching. Elijah laid out planks of wood, hammers, and nails on a makeshift work table. We're going to build a bench, he explained, gesturing to show his meaning. Something to sit on. The lieutenant translated poorly, but the women seemed to understand. Elijah demonstrated how to hold the hammer, how to start a nail with light taps before driving it home. Aiko was the first to try, her small hands gripping the tool awkwardly. The nail bent on her second strike. She looked up, embarrassed. That happens to everyone, Elijah said gently. Try again. As the morning progressed, the worksite filled with the sounds of hammering, some steady, some hesitant. Boards split when nails went in crooked. Fingers got smacked. But there were small victories too. Corners that met perfectly. Nails driven straight and true. And there was laughter. It started when Tiny accidentally sat on a board freshly painted with waterproofing tar. It spread when one of the women, shy Fumiko, perfectly mimicked his surprised expression. Soon, even Reiko was smiling behind her hand. Later, as the sun climbed higher, the work shifted to mending clothes damaged in the typhoon. The women excelled at this task, their fingers nimble with needle and thread. Aiko showed Elijah how to make tiny, even stitches. Strong seam, she explained, pulling at the thread to show how it held. Will not break in storm. As she guided his large hands through the motion, her finger pricked on the needle. A drop of blood welled up, bright red against her skin. Without thinking, Elijah took her hand to examine the small wound. "You're hurt," he said, reaching for a clean scrap of cloth. The camp fell silent. Every eye turned toward them, the black soldier holding the Japanese woman's hand. Captain Madsen, passing by on his daily inspection, stopped cold. Elijah immediately released Aiko's hand and stepped back. "Just checking the injury, sir," he said to Madsen's thunderous expression. "Private Brooks, a word." Elijah followed the captain out of earshot. Clara Adams watched intently from her position near the supply tent. "I warned you," Madsen hissed. "One more incident like that and you'll be on report." "She hurt herself, sir. I don't care if she was bleeding to death. You do not touch the prisoners. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." Elijah returned to the work area, his face carefully blank. The women had resumed their sewing, heads bent over their work. Aiko didn't look up when he passed. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Elijah sat alone near the beach, his harmonica in his hands. He played softly, a spiritual his grandmother had taught him, "Wade in the water." From the direction of the women's quarters came another sound, voices singing quietly in Japanese. The melody was the same hymn from the storm night, but with different words. The two songs wove together across the darkening camp, finding harmony where no words could. Clara stood in the shadows of a tent flap, listening, her pencil moving quickly across the page. A week passed. The new barracks for the women rose steadily, its wooden frame taking shape against the sky. The tension in the camp eased somewhat as routine returned, though Captain Madsen maintained his vigilance over Elijah and his squad. Clara Adams continued her interviews, gathering stories from both American soldiers and Japanese prisoners. She took photographs of the construction, of daily life, of faces both weary and hopeful. The island's mail clerk, a cheerful man named Peterson, arrived one morning with his canvas bag slung over his shoulder. "Letters from home," he called, drawing the usual crowd. Elijah received 3 envelopes, all from Ruth. He took them to a quiet spot to read, savoring each word like water in a desert. The first 2 contained family news, church gossip, tales of neighbors and harvests. The third letter struck him like a physical blow. "Dear brother, I don't know how to write this except plainly. Mama is sick. The doctor from Albany came out and says it's her heart. She asks for you every day. I've told her you'll be home soon, though I don't know if that's true. The farm is struggling without you. The drought broke, but now the rains won't stop. The creek flooded and we lost half the east field. Please try to come home if you can. We need you, Elijah. Your loving sister, Ruth." Elijah folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Home seemed impossibly far away. Later that morning, he noticed Aiko sitting alone outside the nearly finished barracks, a small piece of paper in her hands. She was writing slowly, carefully forming English letters. Clara Adams sat down beside her, speaking gently. Elijah couldn't hear their words, but he saw Aiko's expression brighten as she showed Clara her paper. That afternoon, while delivering tools to the supply tent, Elijah overheard their conversation. "I can try to send it," Clara was saying, "but all POW mail goes through Washington. It could take weeks, even months." "Please," Aiko replied. "My brother in Kyoto, he thinks I am dead." "Does Captain Madsen know you're writing letters?" "He says we may send 1 letter each month, but they go to big office first. My brother is old. He may not wait so long." Clara hesitated. "I'm leaving for Guam tomorrow, then to San Francisco. I could take it with me. Make sure it gets to Japan faster." "You would do this?" "I've broken bigger rules for smaller reasons," Clara said with a smile. "But keep it our secret, okay?" Elijah backed away quietly, not wanting to intrude. That evening, as he sat on a piece of driftwood watching the sunset, he polished his harmonica and prayed for his mother's health, for Ruth's strength, and for Aiko's letter to reach her brother. Sunday dawned clear and bright. The camp stirred to life slowly. Morning duties performed with the unhurried pace that marked the one day of relative rest. Reverend Hall, a gentle white preacher who served as the post chaplain, set up the mess hall for services. Few soldiers attended regularly. Most preferred to use their free hours for sleep, letter writing, or card games. Elijah arrived early, helping to arrange the folding chairs in neat rows. He found comfort in the familiar rituals, the same hymns and "Good to see you, Private Brooks," Reverend Hall said, shaking his hand. "Will any of your friends be joining us?" "Don't expect so, Reverend. Lewis is on duty, and Tiny, well, church ain't really his thing." The service began with just a handful of men, all white except for Elijah. Reverend Hall didn't seem to notice or care about the division. His sermon spoke of grace in times of hardship, of finding God's presence even on remote islands far from home. Halfway through the first hymn, a sound at the door made heads turn. The Japanese women stood hesitantly at the entrance, heads bowed respectfully. Aiko led the group, her eyes finding Elijah's for just a moment before looking down again. A murmur ran through the small congregation. Reverend Hall paused, then smiled broadly. "Please, join us," he said, gesturing to the empty chairs. The women filed in quietly, taking seats in the back row. When the singing resumed, Amazing Grace, their voices joined in, the Japanese words fitting somehow with the English melody. After the service, Captain Madsen confronted Reverend Hall outside the mess hall. "You should have checked with me before allowing the prisoners to attend." "The Lord's house is open to all, Captain," Hall replied calmly. "I saw no threat to security in their presence." "That's not the point. There are protocols. With respect, sir, I answer to a higher authority in matters of worship." The Reverend's voice remained gentle but firm. What I witnessed in there was not rebellion, it was healing. As they argued, Elijah noticed something strange. A sound drifted across the camp, a single clear tone that hung in the air like a question. The old church bell, salvaged during the American landing and stored unused since the invasion, had somehow been rung. Everyone paused, listening to the fading echo. Even Captain Madsen fell silent. The women walked back to their barracks, eyes downcast, but with a new serenity in their faces. No one asked who had rung the bell. No one needed to. The next day, Clara Adams approached Captain Madsen with a proposal. "The women need something constructive to do while waiting for their transfer orders," she argued. "A sewing project would be perfect, something to boost morale." "Morale?" Madsen's eyebrow raised. "They're prisoners, Mrs. Adams, not a ladies' auxiliary." "Even prisoners need purpose, Captain. It might help keep them." She paused deliberately. "Out of trouble." Madsen considered this. "What kind of project?" "A quilt, using scraps from damaged uniforms and supplies. The women are skilled with needle and thread, and it would keep them busy for weeks." "And what would be the purpose of this quilt?" Clara thought quickly. A gift for headquarters, a gesture of reconciliation. 2 days later, Clara's suggestion became reality. A space was cleared in the new barracks for what she called the quilting circle. Scraps of fabric, olive drab from uniforms, blue from naval supplies, white from parachute silk, were sorted and cut into squares. The women took to the project eagerly. Even Reiko, still stern and reserved, showed a talent for precise cutting and matching patterns. Elijah and his squad were assigned to monitor the activity, a task that soon evolved into genuine participation. Lewis surprised everyone by knowing how to use a needle, a skill learned from his mother. Tiny's large fingers proved unexpectedly nimble at tying off threads. Days passed. The quilt grew square by square, a patchwork of war transformed into something new. As they worked, barriers slowly melted. Words were exchanged, English, Japanese, the universal language of smiles and nods. Clara moved among them, taking notes, asking questions, sometimes just watching. Captain Madsen checked in regularly, his suspicious glare gradually softening to grudging acceptance as he saw the peaceful industry. One afternoon, Elijah noticed Aiko working on a special section. In the center of a dark blue square, she was embroidering a delicate cherry blossom in pale pink thread. Beside it, a white star took shape. "What does it mean?" he asked, gesturing to the design. Aiko thought for a moment, searching for the right English words. "Cherry blossom is Japan," she said softly. "Star is America." She pointed to the two symbols touched, their edges meeting but not overtaking each other. "Peace," she said simply. Later, as the day's work ended, Aiko showed Elijah another part of the quilt, words stitched carefully in both English and Japanese characters. "Hope believes." "From Bible," she explained. "In church." Elijah nodded, understanding. "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things," he quoted. Aiko's eyes widened in recognition. "Yes, this. It's beautiful," he said. "When it's finished, I'll play a special tune for it." "Promise?" "I promise." As twilight fell, the camp grew quiet. In her temporary quarters, Clara wrote her article draft by lamplight. In the command tent, Captain Madsen filed his weekly report, mentioning the quilting project as a successful containment activity. In the barracks, soldiers played cards and wrote letters home. And in the women's quarters, Aiko added one final stitch to her cherry blossom, her needle catching the last ray of sunset through the window. The thread glowed golden for just a moment, like a promise waiting to be kept. After weeks of patient work, the quilt was finally finished. Every stitch told a story of war and peace, of strangers becoming friends, of hope taking root in barren soil. "We should have a small ceremony," Clara suggested to Captain Madsen. "Show what the women have accomplished." Madsen frowned. "This isn't a church social, Mrs. Adams." "No, it's better," Clara replied. "It's a chance to show headquarters that your command is fostering positive relations with former enemies. Imagine how that would look in your record." The captain's expression changed slightly. "A brief gathering," he agreed reluctantly. "Nothing elaborate." Word spread quickly. The next afternoon, a small crowd gathered in the clearing between buildings, soldiers from both the white and black units, a handful of local islanders who worked as camp helpers, and Clara with her ever-present notebook and camera. The women entered in a line, Reiko leading with her back straight and head high. Behind her, Aiko and the others carried the folded quilt, a burst of color against their plain clothes. The table had been set up in the center of the clearing. The women carefully spread the quilt across it, smoothing the fabric with gentle hands. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even Captain Madsen looked impressed. The quilt was a masterpiece of improvisation. Uniform scraps, parachute silk, and even threads pulled from colored signal flags had been transformed into a tapestry of surprising beauty. At the center, Aiko's cherry blossom and star shone like a beacon, surrounded by patterns that somehow blended American and Japanese designs. Around the border, the words "Hope believes" appeared in both English and Japanese characters. "The women would like to say something," Clara announced. She nodded to Reiko, who stepped forward. "We thank you for your—" She paused, searching for the word. "Kindness. This quilt carries our hope for peace between our peoples." Aiko moved to Reiko's side. "We wish to sing," she said softly. "With your permission." Captain Madsen nodded, his expression guarded. Elijah felt a hand touch his arm. Corporal Lewis, holding out a harmonica. "Thought you might need this," he whispered. As Elijah raised the harmonica to his lips, the women began to sing. The melody was "Nearer, My God, to Thee," the same hymn from the night of the storm. This time, they sang in both Japanese and English. The words different, but the music a bridge between worlds. Elijah's harmonica joined their voices, a clear, sweet counterpoint that seemed to lift the simple tune towards the cloudless sky. One by one, other soldiers added their instrument. Clara moved through the crowd, her camera capturing it all. The quilt with its message of hope, the women singing with quiet dignity, the black soldiers playing alongside, and the gradual softening of faces as the music worked its gentle magic. For a few precious minutes, there were no enemies, no races, no bitter memories of war, just the shared language of music and the promise of healing stitched into every square of the quilt. Even Captain Madsen stood transfixed, his usual frown replaced by something like wonder. As the final notes faded into silence, applause broke out, hesitant at first, then growing stronger. The women bowed, their faces glowing with quiet pride. That, Clara whispered to herself, is a demonstration worth writing about. But as the crowd began to disperse, a sharp crackle came from the command tent. The radio operator emerged, his face troubled. "Captain Madsen, sir. Urgent message from Washington." The captain strode quickly toward the tent, disappearing inside. Minutes later, he emerged with a face like thunder. "Adams," he called. "My office. Now." Elijah watched them go, a sense of unease settling over his momentary joy. Whatever had come through that radio, it wasn't good news. "The Tinian demonstration," the radio operator muttered as he passed. "That's what they're calling it. Headquarters wants a full report." The fragile peace of the afternoon crumbled like sand beneath an incoming tide. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon the next morning, matching the mood that had descended over the camp. Soldiers moved with unusual quietness, speaking in low voices that fell silent whenever an officer approached. Elijah was cleaning his boots when Sergeant Mills appeared at the barracks door. "Brooks, Captain wants you." The walk to the command tent felt like the longest of Elijah's life. Inside, Captain Madsen sat behind his desk, a stack of papers before him. His face was hard as stone. "Private Brooks," he said without looking up, "do you know what these are?" "No, sir." "Orders from headquarters." Madsen slapped a hand on the papers. "It seems your demonstration yesterday has caught the attention of some very important people." "Sir, we were just—" "Silence!" Madsen stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Washington has accused this unit of over-familiarity with enemy prisoners. They want names, details, punishments." Elijah stood at rigid attention, his eyes fixed on a point above Madsen's head. Adams was supposed to write a simple piece about camp operations. Instead, she's been sending drafts about cultural exchange and music bridging divides. Her editors misread it all, or willfully misinterpreted it as some kind of romantic entanglement between my men and the Japanese women. "That's not what happened, sir. What happened doesn't matter. It's what they think happened." Madsen circled the desk to stand inches from Elijah's face. "You're suspended for regular duties pending inquiry. You'll remain confined to barracks except for meals." "Yes, sir." "The women will return to full confinement. No more quilting, no more singing, no more church services. They are prisoners, not guests." "They've done nothing wrong, sir." Madsen's face flushed with anger. "Neither did I, Private. But we're all paying for this mistake." Dismissed. Rain began to fall as Elijah left the command tent. Gentle at first, then harder, drumming against the metal roofs. Through the gray curtain, he could see the women's barracks, now surrounded by a double line of guards. Beyond the fence, Aiko stood in the doorway, watching. Their eyes met briefly across the rainy distance. Then a guard moved between them, and she was gone. Morning brought the sound of airplane engines. A sleek military seaplane skimmed across the lagoon, sending up plumes of spray before settling on the blue water. From its door emerged a tall man in the uniform of a major, his insignia marking him as a member of the Judge Advocate General's office, a military tribunal officer. Captain Madsen and Sergeant Mills met him at the dock, saluting crisply. Elijah watched from the mess tent window, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Court-martial officers didn't make trips to remote islands unless something serious was happening. Clara Adams appeared at his side. "That's Major William Peterson," she said quietly, "military prosecutor. I've met him before in the Philippines." "What's he doing here?" Elijah asked, though he feared he knew the answer. "Damage control." Clara's mouth tightened. "My editor sent a draft of my article to his brother-in-law in the War Department for fact-checking. It wasn't ready, just notes, really. But it was enough to cause a stir." "What did you write?" "The truth. About the storm, the music, the quilt. About soldiers and prisoners finding common ground." She sighed. "But people see what they want to see, especially when it involves different races." Through the window, they watched the major inspect the camp with Madsen at his side, pausing to stare at the women's barracks. Later that day, Clara was summoned to the command tent. She returned 2 hours later, her face tight with anger. "They're sending you to Guam," she told Elijah when she found him, "for formal review. It's ridiculous. I showed Peterson my notes, my photographs. I told him what really happened." Didn't change his mind? He's not interested in the truth. He wants someone to blame so headquarters can tell the brass that they've handled the situation. Her fists clenched at her sides. "And the women are being shipped elsewhere. They're breaking up the whole camp." Elijah looked out toward the ocean, feeling a strange calm settle over him. "Maybe it's for the best. We'll all go home eventually." "That's not the point. They're punishing you for basic human decency." "Wouldn't be the first time." Elijah smiled faintly. "My daddy used to say, 'Son, sometimes doing right looks wrong to folks who don't know any better.'" Clara studied his face, then reached into her bag. "Here, take this. I want you to have it." She pressed his harmonica into his palm, the one he had loaned to the women for their practice. "If they forget what we did here." "What really happened?" Elijah said, closing his fingers around the tarnished metal. "Play this. It'll remind them it was real." Rain began to fall again as darkness approached. In his barracks, Elijah packed his few belongings into his duffel bag. The transfer to Guam would come with tomorrow's supply boat. Through the small window, he could see lights in the women's barracks. Shadows moved behind the cloth-covered windows, the last night before they too would be scattered to different camps. He raised the harmonica to his lips and played softly, sending the notes like prayers into the rainy darkness. Dawn broke gray and somber. The rain had stopped, but clouds hung low over the island, as if the sky itself mourned what was to come. Wooden wagons, pulled by the camp's few horses, lined the path to the dock. Soldiers loaded supplies, paperwork, and equipment for transfer. The Japanese women stood in a silent line, their few possessions gathered in small bundles. Captain Madsen read the orders aloud. "The prisoners will be transported to Processing Center 12 on Saipan, pending final repatriation arrangements. Private First Class Elijah Brooks will report to Military Justice Division, Guam, for review of conduct." Elijah stood apart from the other soldiers, a guard at his side, though he wore no restraints. Rules required the prisoners to keep their eyes forward, heads down. But as they were led toward the wagons, Aiko turned slightly. Her hand moved to her collar, where she had hidden a small scrap of the quilt, the piece with the cherry blossom and star. Her eyes met Elijah's for the briefest moment, a lifetime of words passing in a single glance. Then she was guided into the wagon, disappearing among the other women. Clara Adams approached Elijah, her camera hanging unused at her side. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "My article will tell the truth." "Truth's a tricky thing," Elijah replied. "Folks hear what they want to hear. Not if I write it clearly enough." Her jaw set with determination. "I'm gonna follow this story all the way to its ending." The ferry's horn sounded, a long, mournful note that echoed across the water. The wagons began to move toward the dock. Elijah watched them go, the harmonica heavy in his pocket. He thought of Georgia, of his sister's letters, of his mother's illness. Perhaps this transfer would somehow get him closer to home. But as the wagons reached the dock and the women began boarding the ferry, he felt something tear inside him. Not just the pain of a friendship cut short, but the deeper wound of injustice. The ferry horn sounded again. Aiko turned at the top of the gangplank, her face lifted to the camp one last time. Even at this distance, Elijah could feel her eyes finding him. Then the sea closed behind her, waves erasing any trace of her passage. 2 days later, Elijah stood on the deck of the supply vessel Morning Star, watching Tinian fade into the mist behind them. He wasn't in chains, but the guard who accompanied him made his status clear. He was being transported for judgment, not reassignment. The boat pitched and rolled on the choppy sea. Most soldiers stayed below, fighting seasickness. But Elijah preferred the open air, the taste of salt spray, the freedom of sky above him. "Thought I'd find you here." Clara Adams joined him at the railing, her short hair whipping in the wind. "Didn't know you'd be on this boat," Elijah said. "I go where the story goes." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I wanted you to see this, my new draft." Elijah took the paper, unfolding it carefully in the wind. At the top, in bold letters, "A demonstration of grace, when music bridged the gap between former enemies." "You changed the title," he noted. "The original wasn't my choice. My editor went for something more sensational. This is the real story." She took back the pages. "I've rewritten it from scratch. No misunderstandings this time." Elijah smiled faintly. "Don't reckon it'll change what happens in Guam." "Maybe not, but someday someone will read this and know what really happened on Tinian." The journey to Guam took a full day, the small vessel making slow progress against the current. When they arrived, rain was falling in sheets, turning the harbor into a world of gray shapes and muffled sounds. Elijah was escorted to a barracks at the edge of a sprawling military base. Here, soldiers awaiting various disciplinary actions were housed together, some for serious offenses, others, like him, caught in the machinery of military bureaucracy. Clara visited him that evening, somehow having secured permission from the base commander. "I'm leaving tomorrow," she told him. "Going back to San Francisco to file my story. But I've learned something you should know." Elijah sat on his cot, listening. Japan has made a formal request for all female POWs to be returned as soon as possible. The women from Tinian, they're not going to another camp. Their ship is turning back. They'll be at Tinian again by tomorrow for reassignment. "Back to Tinian?" Elijah's heart quickened. "Why?" "Diplomatic pressure. Japan wants its people home, especially the women. They're sending a boat straight from Tokyo to pick them up." Clara smiled. Sometimes the universe has its own sense of justice. That night, Elijah lay awake, thinking of Aiko returning to the island they had shared. Would she look for him? Would she understand why he was gone? He clutched the harmonica in his hand, its metal warm from his touch. Somewhere on that same sea, she carried a scrap of their quilt, a cherry blossom beside a star. Japan and America touching, but not overtaking each other. Peace, she had called it. Such a simple word for such a complicated world. Chaos greeted the women upon their return to Tinian. Captain Madsen, already struggling with the sudden departure of the 93rd Infantry and the arrival of a new white unit, now faced the unexpected return of prisoners he thought were gone for good. "What do you mean they're coming back?" he demanded of the radio operator. "I was told they were being transferred permanently." "New orders, sir. Diplomatic exchange. Japanese government sent a request straight to Washington. All female POWs are to be returned to Japan on the first available transport." The women arrived on the same ferry that had taken them away, confused by the sudden change but grateful not to be separated. As they disembarked, Aiko's eyes searched the dock, the camp, the faces of soldiers, looking for one who was no longer there. "He's gone, miss," said an old sailor who noticed her searching gaze. "The black fellow with the harmonica. They took him to Guam." Aiko's face fell, but she nodded in understanding. Her fingers touched the scrap of quilt hidden in her collar, their shared symbol of hope. The women were housed again under guard. though this time in the proper barracks that had been completed. The mood among the new soldiers was different, less hostile, more professional. They had not lived through the typhoon, had not heard the music, had not seen the quilt take shape stitch by stitch. Late that afternoon, Clara Adams raced from the communications center to the command tent. In her hand, she clutched a telegram form and her rewritten article. "Captain Madsen," she called, slightly out of breath. "I need to speak with you urgently." Madsen looked up from his paperwork, frowning. "I thought you'd left for the mainland." "Change of plans. I received word that my original draft was misinterpreted. If it's published as is, it will cause even more problems." She placed her rewritten pages on his desk. "This version tells what really happened. No innuendo. No room for misunderstanding." "It's too late," Madsen said wearily. "The wheels are already turning." "It's never too late to tell the truth." Clara leaned forward. "Your report hasn't reached Washington yet. It's still waiting for the next courier plane. You can amend it. Attach my corrected article." "And why would I do that?" "Because deep down, you know what happened here wasn't wrong. Different people finding common ground isn't a threat. It's the only way forward in this broken world." Madsen said nothing for a long moment. Outside, thunder rumbled, another storm approaching, as if the island itself was marking the rhythm of their shared story. "You're asking me to admit I was wrong," he said finally. "I'm asking you to be on the right side of history." Clara watched as pride warred with conscience on Madsen's face. He was a product of his time, his training, his own limited experience. But he was also a man capable of change. The thunder grew louder, and the first heavy drops began to fall against the tent canvas. As the storm gathered strength, Captain Madsen stared at the papers on his desk, Clara's rewritten article and his own half-finished report. Years of military training told him to follow procedure, to maintain order at any cost. But something deeper, something that had been awakened by the music, the quilt, the quiet dignity of prisoners and soldiers finding common ground, pushed against those rigid rules. "Leave this with me," he said finally. "I need to think." Clara nodded and stepped back. "The courier plane leaves at dawn. Whatever you decide, it needs to be done by then." As she walked away, the rain began to fall in earnest, washing over the camp like tears from heaven. In Guam, Elijah sat on a narrow cot in what the soldiers called the stockade, a simple wooden building where men awaiting judgment were housed. The windows were small but had no bars, the door locked only from the outside. It wasn't a prison, exactly, but neither was it freedom. Night had fallen, bringing with it a gentle rain that tapped against the metal roof. Most of the other men were playing cards or writing letters. Elijah sat alone, thinking of home, of Tinian, of a cherry blossom stitched beside a star. Then he heard it, faint but unmistakable. Music. The melody drifted through the thin walls, barely audible above the rain. Elijah closed his eyes, listening harder. It couldn't be, and yet it was. The sound of a harmonica, playing "Nearer, My God, to Thee." He moved to the window, pressing his ear against the damp wood. The music grew clearer. Not one harmonica, but several, playing in rough harmony. And with them, voices singing softly in Japanese. "You hear that?" asked a soldier named Martinez, looking up from his card game. "I hear it," Elijah said quietly. "Sounds like church music." "It is." Other men gathered at the windows, listening. The simple tunes spread through the stockade, calming the restless atmosphere. Even the guard at the door stopped his pacing to listen. "Where's it coming from?" someone asked. "The women's transit barracks," the guard answered, surprising them all. Japanese prisoners waiting for transport home. Someone gave them harmonicas a couple days ago. Elijah's heart swelled. The women had been brought to Guam, not Saipan. They were here, close enough for their music to reach him. "My mama used to sing that hymn," said an older soldier sitting by the door. "Mine too," said another. One by one, the men began to hum along, adding their voices to the distant music. The sound grew, spreading beyond the stockade across the rainy compound. Outside, soldiers and officers stopped to listen. The bass fell quiet, except for the gentle rain and the music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Major William Peterson, the military prosecutor who had come to investigate the Tinian incident, stepped out of his quarters. Tilting his head toward the sound, "What is that?" he asked a passing sergeant. "Harmonicas, sir. The Japanese women from Tinian are playing them." "Who gave them instruments?" "Don't know, sir, but half the base is listening now." Indeed, the music had drawn people from their quarters. They stood in small groups under the rain, faces turned toward the women's barracks, where golden lamplight glowed behind paper-covered windows. The major made his way across the compound, intending to stop what he saw as another breach of protocol. But as he approached, the music washed over him, simple, pure, powerful in its quietness. He slowed his steps, then stopped altogether. Something in the melody reached past his uniform, past his rank, past all the rules and regulations that had shaped his life. It touched the man beneath, the boy who had once sung this same hymn in a white-steepled church back home. Captain Madsen appeared beside him, rain streaming down his face. "It's quite something, isn't it, sir?" he said quietly. "You followed me from Tinian? Came on the supply plane, brought my amended report." Madsen held out a sealed envelope, already damp from the rain. "And this?" The major took the envelope but didn't open it. His eyes remained fixed on the glowing windows, the source of the music that had stilled an entire military base. "I think I misjudged the situation," Madsen said, the admission clearly difficult for him. "What happened on Tinian wasn't improper. It was healing." "Healing," the major repeated, tasting the word. "Yes, sir. After all the killing, all the hatred, these people found a way to be human together. I was wrong to try to stop it." The music swelled slightly as more voices joined in, American and Japanese, soldier and prisoner, all singing the same melody in different languages. The major looked down at the envelope in his hand, then at the stockade where Elijah waited for judgment. "Bring Brooks here," he ordered a nearby MP. "I want him to see this." 10 minutes later, Elijah stood in the rain, listening to the music with wonder on his face. The major studied him, this black soldier whose simple act of playing a harmonica had somehow bridged chasms of race and war. "It appears I've received new information about your case, Private," the major said, holding up Madsen's envelope. "And I've witnessed something rather extraordinary tonight." Elijah said nothing, his eyes fixed on the glowing windows. "Captain Madsen tells me your actions were a demonstration of the very values we claim to be fighting for." The major's voice had lost its hard edge. "I'm inclined to agree." He turned to an aide. "Release orders for Private Brooks. He's being returned to regular duty." As the aide hurried away, the major added, "The women leave for Japan tomorrow. You have until then to say your goodbyes." Madsen stepped forward as the major walked away. "Seems your music did more than my orders ever did," he muttered, not quite meeting Elijah's eyes. "It reminded us we're all human." The rain continued to fall, but Elijah hardly noticed. The music from the women's barracks filled the night, healing wounds that no medicine could touch. Early morning sunlight streamed through the window of the communications office in Guam. Clara Adams sat at a battered typewriter, fingers flying over the keys. She had been writing all night, fueled by coffee and determination. The headline took shape in bold capitals. When black soldiers demonstrated their techniques to Japanese POW women, the room fell silent. But beneath it, the subheading told the real story, a lesson in harmony that could heal a wounded world. Clara paused, rereading what she had written. In a remote corner of the Pacific, on an island most Americans couldn't find on a map, something remarkable happened last month. A group of black American soldiers and Japanese women prisoners of war found common ground through the universal language of music. It began during a typhoon, when Private Elijah Brooks of the 93rd Infantry played a simple hymn on his harmonica to calm frightened souls sheltering from the storm. It continued through weeks of shared work, building, mending, creating a quilt that symbolized hope in a world torn by war. What these soldiers demonstrated wasn't impropriety, as some early reports suggested. What they demonstrated was grace, the ability to see beyond uniform and skin color to the humanity we all share. When Private Brooks played and the Japanese women sang, the room fell silent, not in shock, but in recognition of a truth too often forgotten. Music speaks when words fail, and compassion knows no enemy. She sat back, satisfied. This was the story that needed to be told, not a scandal, but a small miracle. The door opened, and a communications officer stuck his head in. "Cable's ready to San Francisco whenever you are, Mrs. Adams." "Thank you. I'm almost finished." Clara typed a few more paragraphs, describing how Captain Madsen had come to recognize the value of what had happened under his command. She mentioned the quilt with its cherry blossom and star, the harmonicas playing across a rainy compound, the silence that fell when enemies became simply people. She concluded, as Japan and America look toward an uncertain future, the lesson of Tinian offers hope. If soldiers and prisoners can find harmony amid the ashes of war, perhaps nations can do the same. Private Brooks put it simply, "We were just trying to be decent folks in a hard place. Perhaps that's all any of us can do, and perhaps that's enough." Clara pulled the final page from the typewriter and handed the stack to the waiting officer. "Send this to the Herald Tribune. Attention, Editor-in-Chief. Mark it urgent." "Yes, ma'am." As the officer took her article, Clara glanced out the window. A large transport ship had docked overnight, the vessel that would take the Japanese women home. On the dock, soldiers were already preparing for their departure. She gathered her camera and notebook. There was one more scene to witness, one more moment to record before this story was complete. In his quarters, Captain Madsen received a telegram from Washington. He opened it with shaking hands, expecting reprimand or worse for changing his report. Instead, he found approval. His revised account of the Tinian demonstration, supported by Clara's reporting, had been accepted. The investigation was closed. The women would be repatriated with dignity. Elijah Brooks would receive an official commendation for restoring order with compassion during extreme conditions. Madsen sat heavily in his chair, relief washing over him. He had done the right thing, however belatedly. It wouldn't erase all his mistakes, all his prejudices, but it was a start. That evening, as the sun set over Guam, an extraordinary scene unfolded in the base mess hall. The Japanese women, hours away from boarding the ship that would take them home, shared a final meal with the soldiers who had once been their guards. Elijah sat beside Aiko, neither speaking much, but finding comfort in each other's presence. Around them, other soldiers and women communicated through gestures. Smiles, the universal language of shared food. Captain Madsen arrived late, standing awkwardly at the doorway until Elijah noticed him and nodded slightly. The captain walked to their table, clearing his throat. "Miss Aiko," he said, addressing her directly for perhaps the first time. "I understand you'll be on tomorrow's transport." She nodded, her dark eyes watchful. "I wanted to wish you a safe journey home." He hesitated, then added, "And to thank you. Your music, it reminded us of better things." Aiko bowed slightly. "Thank you, Captain," she said in her careful English, "for letting us sing." Madsen's weathered face softened. "It was my honor to hear it." He nodded to Elijah and moved away, stopping at other tables to exchange brief words with each of the women who would soon be gone. Clara, watching from a corner, captured it all in her notebook, not for publication, but for herself. Some moments deserved to be remembered exactly as they happened. Lanterns glowed in the gathering darkness, casting a warm light over faces once divided by war. now united in the simple human pleasure of breaking bread together. Tomorrow would bring separation, but tonight, peace felt not just possible, but present, a flower blooming in soil that had known too much blood. Morning came too quickly. The Japanese women packed their few belongings quietly, each lost in thoughts of home and the long journey ahead. Aiko folded her spare dress carefully, tucking the precious scrap of quilt, with its cherry blossom and star, into the center for safekeeping. Around her neck hung a small silver crucifix, the one Elijah had noticed on that first day on the ship from Okinawa. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Outside, soldiers loaded supplies onto trucks that would take everyone to the harbor. The transport ship waited, a gray silhouette against the blue horizon. By sunset, it would be heading toward Japan, carrying the women back to whatever remained of their homes. Elijah waited by the trucks, his cap in his hands. He had been assigned to escort duty, his final official interaction with the prisoners, who had become so much more than that. As the women emerged from their barracks, he saw Aiko immediately. She carried herself with quiet dignity, her face composed, but her eyes searching until they found his. A small smile lifted the corners of her mouth. The trucks rumbled down to the harbor, bouncing over rutted roads. No one spoke much. What could be said in these final moments that hadn't already been expressed through music, through shared work, through the simple recognition of each other's humanity? At the dock, officials checked papers and counted heads. Elijah helped unload the women's meager belongings, working slowly, stretching out these last minutes. Finally, all was ready. The ship's horn sounded, a warning that departure was near. Aiko approached him, holding something wrapped in a scrap of cloth. "For you," she said softly, pressing it into his hands. Elijah unwrapped it, his harmonica, the one that had started everything during the typhoon. With it was the small piece of the quilt she had saved, now folded around the instrument like a protective cover. "To remember," she said. "I couldn't forget if I tried," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. They stood facing each other, a black American soldier and a Japanese woman, brought together by war, but connected by something stronger, the recognition of each other's full humanity. "Your home," Elijah said. "I hope it's still there." "And yours," Aiko replied. "Your mother, I hope she is well." "Thank you." He wanted to say more, to express all that had changed inside him since that stormy night when music bridged the gap between enemies. But words seemed too small, too limited. Instead, he simply said, "Your song, keep singing it." "Always," she promised. "In my heart, if nowhere else." The ship's horn blasted again. A sailor called for final boarding. Aiko bowed deeply, a gesture of profound respect. Elijah returned it, bending at the waist as he had seen her do so many times. "Sayonara, Elijah Brooks," she said, using his full name for the first time. "Goodbye, Aiko," he replied softly. "God be with you." She turned and walked up the gangplank, not looking back until she reached the deck. There, she paused, lifting her hand in a final farewell. Elijah stood on the dock, his cap in one hand, her gifts in the other, watching as the ship slowly pulled away. The distance between them grew, foot by foot, yard by yard, until Aiko was just a small figure at the railing, then a shape, then gone altogether as the vessel moved into deeper water. Clara Adams captured that last moment with her camera, Elijah standing alone on the dock, hat in hand. Watching the ship that carried Aiko back to her world, the image would never appear in her newspaper article, but she would keep it always, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained on a small island in the vast Pacific. As the ship disappeared into the horizon, Elijah felt a strange mixture of sadness and peace. They had shared so little time together, yet something profound had happened. A recognition that even after the worst war in human history, grace was still possible. He placed the harmonica in his pocket, close to his heart, and turned away from the sea. There were new orders waiting, a war still winding down, a long road still to travel before he would see Georgia again. But he walked a little straighter now, a little more certain of his own worth. The music that had started in a storm-tossed hut on Tinian would continue, carried now in two hearts, separated by ocean but joined by memory. Behind him, the Pacific stretched endless and blue, a highway of water connecting distant shores. Somewhere on that vast sea, Aiko was beginning her journey home, carrying with her the memory of a melody that had made a room fall silent and, for a brief moment, had brought peace to a corner of a wounded world. The Georgia sun beat down on dusty fields, turning the world golden brown. Elijah Brooks stood at the edge of his family's farm, gazing across rows of struggling corn. The drought had broken at last, but too late for a good harvest. Still, he was home, and that was enough. 6 months had passed since his return from the Pacific. The war was fading into memory for most folks, replaced by the daily struggles of peace, rebuilding, replanting, remembering how to live without fear. For Elijah, the journey home had been long. After Guam, he had been transferred to Hawaii, then California, then finally discharged with a handshake and a train ticket to Georgia. He had arrived too late for his mother's funeral. Ruth had met him at the station, her face thin with grief, but her eyes bright with relief. "She knew you were coming," Ruth had told him as they drove the rutted road to the farm. She held on as long as she could, talking about her brave boy overseas. Now, as summer heat shimmered across the fields, Elijah worked from dawn to dusk, repairing what had fallen into disrepair, coaxing life from soil that had known too much neglect. At night, he played his harmonica on the porch steps, the same instrument Aiko had wrapped in the quilt scrap and returned to him that last day in Guam. Sometimes he played "Nearer My God to Thee" and wondered if somewhere across the vast Pacific she might be singing it too. Ruth called from the farmhouse door, breaking his thoughts. "Elijah, Reverend Hall's here to see you." The minister from their small church waited in the shade of the porch, his hat in his hands. He smiled as Elijah approached, extending a worn envelope. "This came for you at the church," he said. "Military mail. Been making the rounds for weeks, I reckon." Elijah took the envelope, recognizing the precise handwriting of Captain Madsen. Inside was a brief note. "Private Brooks, your conduct on Tinian has been officially commended in my final report. The attached letter may interest you. It came through diplomatic channels and was forwarded to me. May you find peace in civilian life. Captain R. Madsen." Behind Madsen's note was another envelope, this one bearing Japanese stamps. Elijah's name was written in careful, slightly uneven letters. "Important news?" Reverend Hall asked, noting Elijah's expression. "A letter from Japan." "I'll leave you to read it then," the minister said kindly. "Come by the church when you can. The roof still leaks something terrible." Alone on the porch, Elijah opened the second envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper and something small and flat, a pressed cherry blossom, its delicate petals dried but still perfect. The letter was short, written in careful English. "Dear Elijah Brooks, I hope this finds you well. I am home in Kyoto now. My brother lives still. He cried when I came to his door. He thought I was a ghost. War has changed everything. Our city is broken, but our spirits are not. I am teaching music again. Young children come to learn piano. I teach them your hymn. They like it very much. I am learning it all the way through now. The English words are beautiful. Though like the wanderer, the sun gone down, darkness be over me, my rest a stone. Yet in my dreams I'd be nearer, my God, to thee. We are free, and I am learning your hymn. I hope Georgia is green and beautiful. I hope your mother is well. I hope you play your harmonica still. With gratitude, Aiko Tanaka." Elijah read the letter twice, then held it against his heart. Tears slipped down his cheeks, not of sadness, but of a joy so pure it hurt. Later that evening, as fireflies began to dance across the yard, he sat beside his mother's grave, beneath the old oak tree. The stone was simple, engraved with her name and the dates that bracketed a life of hard work and fierce love. "I'm home, Mama," he whispered, placing a wildflower on the freshly turned earth. "I made it back, just like I promised." The harmonica felt warm in his hands. He raised it to his lips and played softly, the melody of "Nearer, My God, to Thee," floating up through the branches toward the first evening stars. As the final notes faded into the Georgia twilight, Elijah wept quietly, thanking God for unseen connections that spanned oceans, for music that spoke when words could not, and for the promise of healing in a broken world. 1 year later, as autumn painted the Georgia woods in shades of gold and crimson, a package arrived at the small post office in town. The postmaster, Mr. Jenkins, drove it out to the Brooks farm himself, curious about the crate covered in foreign stamps and official seals. "All the way from Japan," he announced, helping Elijah carry it to the porch. "Must be something mighty important." Ruth watched anxiously as her brother pried open the wooden crate with a crowbar. Inside, wrapped in layers of waxed paper, lay something soft and colorful. "It's a quilt," she gasped as Elijah carefully lifted it out. "Oh my, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The quilt was larger than the one made on Tinian, a full bedspread now, not just a wall hanging. But at its center was the familiar design, the cherry blossom and star, surrounded by new patterns that flowed outward like ripples in water. A letter tucked inside explained in Aiko's improved English, "Dear Elijah, we have completed the quilt we started on Tinian. Women from my neighborhood helped, some who lost husbands, some who lost sons. I told them about the black soldiers who played music during the storm, about the kindness when kindness was unexpected. The quilt has prayers stitched into it, Japanese and English words asking for peace. Each woman added her hope. My brother built the frame. Even his hands, once used for war, now create beauty. Perhaps this small thing can remind us that enemies can become friends, that music speaks when words cannot, that grace appears in unlikely places." Your friend across the ocean, Aiko Elijah, ran his fingers over the intricate stitches, marveling at the work that had gone into this gift. Prayers in 2 languages covered the border, and between them, scenes from Tinian, the barracks, the stormy sea, figures gathered around a harmonica. "We should hang it in the church," Ruth said softly, "so everyone can see." The following Sunday, with Reverend Hall's blessing, the quilt was hung on the wall behind the pulpit. Church members gathered around, touching it gently, asking questions. Elijah told the story of the typhoon, the music, the women who had been enemies becoming friends. Other veterans in the congregation nodded in understanding. They too had seen the strange grace that sometimes appeared on battlefields, the moments when humanity broke through the walls of hate. Reverend Hall preached that day on reconciliation, on the hard, holy work of turning enemies into neighbors. "This quilt," he said, gesturing toward the colorful tapestry, "is a sermon without words. It tells us that God's work doesn't end when wars do. It's just beginning." After the service, as the congregation filed out into the autumn sunshine, a breeze slipped through an open window. It lifted the edge of the quilt, revealing something that had gone unnoticed. Small words embroidered in golden thread along the bottom edge. "Grace demonstrated." Elijah stood alone in the church, watching as the quilt settled back against the wall. He thought of Aiko in distant Kyoto, of Captain Madsen wherever he was now, of Clara Adams, writing the true story for the world to read. Each of them changed by what had happened on the small island in the vast Pacific. "Grace demonstrated," he whispered, tasting the words. Yes, that's what it was. Outside, children played in piles of fallen leaves. The church bell rang, clear and sweet in the autumn air. Life continued its steady rhythm, carrying them all forward into a future still being stitched together, one careful thread at a time. 5 years passed. The world changed as worlds do after wars. Nations rebuilt. Children grew. New conflicts arose in distant places, and old enemies became uneasy allies. Elijah Brooks became a deacon in his small church. The farm prospered under his care. Ruth married a kind man who had returned from Europe with a limp and a quiet determination to live well. They had 2 children who called Elijah uncle and begged for harmonica songs at bedtime. The quilt from Japan hung still in the church, its colors mellowed by time but its message unchanged. Occasionally, visitors from other towns would come just to see it, having heard the story that Clara Adams had finally published in her book, Harmonies of War. On a cool evening in late September, the church filled for a special service, a reunion of veterans from across the county. Men who had fought in Europe and the Pacific gathered with their families to remember, to give thanks, to acknowledge both the cost and the gift of survival. Reverend Hall, older now but still strong in voice, spoke of healing and hope. "Time doesn't heal all wounds," he said, "but it gives us distance to see them clearly, to tend them properly, to learn from the scars they leave." As the service concluded, he called Elijah forward. "Brother Brooks has something to share with us tonight." Elijah stood before his neighbors and friends. In his hand was a new harmonica, a gift from Ruth on his last birthday, silver and shining in the lamplight. "5 years ago," he said quietly, "I learned that music can speak when words fail. I'd like to play for you the hymn that made a room fall silent on a stormy night, half a world away." He raised the harmonica to his lips and began to play "Nearer, My God, to Thee." The notes filled the small church, clear and sweet, and somehow both sorrowful and joyful at once. One by one, the congregation grew still. Conversation ceased. Even the children, usually restless by this late hour, stopped their whispering and fidgeting. The music wrapped around them all like a quilt of sound, warming cold places, binding invisible wounds. Across the Pacific, in a small house in Kyoto, Aiko Tanaka sat at her piano. The evening lesson had just ended, her last student departing with a bow and a smile. Outside, cherry trees swayed in the autumn breeze, a few early blossoms giving hint of the spring to come. Her fingers found the keys without thinking, playing the melody that had never left her heart. "Nearer, my God, to Thee," the song of the storm, of the soldier with kind eyes, of a moment when enemies became simply people sheltering together. As she played, Aiko smiled, imagining that somewhere in America, Elijah might be playing too. The thought warmed her like sunshine. Different instruments, different countries, same melody. A harmony that spanned oceans and years. In the Georgia church, Elijah played the final verse, the music swelling to fill every corner of the room. No one moved. No one spoke. They sat in perfect stillness, held by something larger than themselves. And in that shared silence, in Georgia and in Kyoto, in hearts scarred by war but healing in peace, 2 nations breathed one prayer. The hope stitched into fabric, played on silver reeds, sung in different languages but same melody, had been fulfilled. Not perfectly, not completely. The world still had its storms, its divisions, its long roads toward understanding. But in this moment, in this quiet space created by music and memory, grace was not just demonstrated. It was alive, breathing, present. The last note hung in the air like a promise. Then slowly, gently, it faded away, leaving behind a silence more eloquent than any words could be. And that was enough.